This presentation is the drone renaissance. The attack surface now includes the sky in context to a lot of what we do. The attack surface has included the sky since World War I for everyone else. So I've been into drones for about 15 years, 3D printing almost as long. I follow the news out of Ukraine pretty religiously, and a lot of the stuff going on there is publicly available knowledge with parts that you can either fabricate yourself or order. So a lot of this stuff you need to be licensed with the FAA, your Part 107 to fly, otherwise it is illegal. Hacking without permission, also illegal. So don't do anything illegal. So just some quick terms. Drone has been used kind of weirdly. The definition's changed a lot over the decades, but typically it means autonomous. The FAA uses small unmanned aerial systems. These are remote controlled by a pilot, and a lot of them increasingly off the shelf or your homemade drones using like ArduPilot or Pixie Hawk, they are becoming increasingly more autonomous with pre-programmed flight paths and other mission parameters. This talk is mostly going to be talking about Perch and Stare drones, which are typically quadcopters or some type of copter. Their primary mission isn't to fly, it's to fly to a location and then begin their mission. And these can stay operational for weeks, potentially, maybe longer, depending on how weathering works. Otherwise, it's until the battery runs out. Fixed wing, that is just your typical airplane design. So the reason I call this a drone renaissance is we're kind of in a renaissance of sorts with AI, additive manufacturing, the internet, making information readily available. So the Gutenberg printing press, it was easier for information to spread because books were easier to create instead of being handwritten. Today, have the internet and 3D printers. You have hobbyist communities all over the world, GitHub, Telegram, Facebook, and a lot of them are designing planes that can be printed. So it also always starts with a printer, kinda. So what's changed? In 2022, when Russia invaded Ukraine, there had already been some advancements with drones in conflict from Syria to cartels in Mexico. 3D printers have come a long way in development and have come down a lot in price in the past 10 years. And you have crowd development on the internet, open source projects, and a lot of this beats corporate research and development cycles by monster years. A lot of the concepts that are proven are used, the ones that don't are fixed or discarded. So we can build a drone, a really advanced one that 15 years ago would have been government property, as long as it's under 55 pounds and you have your Part 107. So one of the big drivers of this is 3D printing. It has greatly expanded over the past 10 years. The market has blown up and is expected to double by 2030. And even prior to the 2000s, 3D printers used to cost around $500,000 and they fell below 100,000. Even today, they've dropped down to about 30,000. What's more important to this talk is prosumer and consumer drones. 10 years ago, a high-end 3D printer would have been $4,000. Today, like my Bamboo and Prusa are better printers than even a $4,000 printer then, and you can get those for under $1,000. So criminals have been using drones a lot in the past few years. Cartels are the big ones for drug smuggling. A lot of the developments in Ukraine have been finding their way out of Ukraine, either on the internet, through files, part designs. And eventually when the war ends, you're going to have all these drone operators and builders from Ukraine disseminating information around the world in person. And we need to think about future threats, particularly critical infrastructure is one that I think of a lot. I'm from West Virginia. This here is the locks on the Kanawha River, which I took with one of my drones. I don't know anything about like ICS or OT, but that doesn't mean someone who doesn't or does can land a drone on here and do some damage. Executive protection is another one, because not everything is going to target an organization. It could target a personal residence or some like frequented spot. So, criminal use of drones primarily in North America has been for drug smuggling. There's been espionage, and petty criminals have used drones to help them commit burglaries, offer airborne surveillance, which 20 years ago would have required a helicopter, and they've even used drones to force the police out of cover and concealment. So, wireless attacks, pretty common, like all the vulnerabilities and threats, which usually are taken care of with good due diligence. So, how are drones any different? It isn't. The difference is the vector. People have limited attention spans, especially in urban environments. There's a lot of background noise, sensory overload. We also have very poor senses, so it's hard for us to see a small, fast-moving object at 400 feet, compared to, say, a barn swallow or a red-tailed hawk, both of which have taken my drones down before. And unlike the noble barn swallow, we have cognitive bias. We have confirmation bias, normalcy bias, and groupthink. No one's going to use a drone to attack our organization. Drones aren't capable of this. If there is a drone, it's supposed to be there. It's a realtor or just a kid playing with a toy. And if no one else cares about this, why should I? So this isn't a new threat. It is a new take on an old threat. Security exists in 3 dimensions. This is a chemical plant in West Virginia that has very good security, fences, cameras, vehicle checkpoints, but do they look at the top of their facility, their roofs, their chemical containers? So, what do you get when you take a drone, throw a solar panel, microcomputer, and an LTE modem on it? You get the Zadun, which is a Perch and Stare drone. A lot of these, typically that we've seen in Ukraine, have been self-placing landmines or explosives. Also act as signal repeaters for radio or controlling other drones. This one here is made out of PVC pipe and has probably a 10-watt solar panel on it. And if you weren't in a war zone, you might think that that's supposed to be on top of that water tower. And every DIY piece of art has its government imitation. The British have developed a drone with a solar panel that can carry a lot of radio equipment, cameras. It can stick to glass surfaces with suction cups or adhesives, can detach itself with a heating element, and it can move on. So this isn't anything that I've come up with. People have been talking about this for a while. Glitch Tech talked about this in 2018. Threat Locker's been talking about it. In 2022, I believe this is the 3rd instance of a drone with a Wi-Fi pineapple attached to it. And this one was used to go after a financial institution. It landed on the roof, had all sorts of equipment with it, and this was done using off-the-shelf like DJI drones. And it cost a lot of money, particularly because the Matrix Pro 600 is about $10,000. So is it necessary to spend this much money? No. So what can be done with a drone is limited only by the laws of physics and the imagination. It's a creativity exercise. What do you want it to do? How far do you want it to be able to go? Because it's either going to have to be bigger, requires more battery, or it's going to have a shorter distance. You can't beat physics. Once the battery's dead, it's done unless it has a solar panel. If it's too heavy, it won't take off. So all you really need to start working on something like this is a 3D printer of sufficient size, CAD software to make modifications. And many of these files are freely available online, either cheap, just free to begin with, or pirated. Most of the parts that you'll need can be found on Amazon or a Micro Center. I'm currently working on a VTOL warflyer, Perch and Stare, using a Flytory Stallion V2 or the Titan Dynamics Avenger. These are Going to have the drawbacks because these aren't small drones, especially the Avenger, which has a 2-meter wingspan. So the reason I'm doing this is proof of concept. If a guy with like a fried central nervous system and like a nice warm home office can do this and not in a war zone in Ukraine, then a lot of other people with worse intent could do it. It's been a learning exercise. I've done more soldering and wiring since I was a kid. I've gotten into CAD development. Tuning and repairing a 3D printer, another good skill. And like I said, I believe this is a underappreciated threat that might have more impact in the coming years, and it's been fun. So, wrapping up, there are challenges to dealing with drones. You can't jam them domestically because that's a felony. You can't shoot them down, also a felony. State and local police probably aren't going to appreciate you firing a gun in public, so you're going to get more charge. Drones are small and hard to detect at their size. Even if they do get picked up by radar, they're going to look like a bird. Forensics on drones is still kind of new, and it's usually taking existing tools that apply to other things and forcing them to apply to drones. Drones have a lot of junk information every time their propellers turn, so we end up with these massive CSV files. There's no civilian tech defeat mechanisms. Most of that's primarily military, and drones are going to become more common, and people are going to start seeing them everywhere, especially if they have an Amazon, Uber Eats, or a utility company sticker on the side of them. What you can do is use an RF scanner, like this one here. This is a Tiny SA Ultra. Drones typically give off EM spikes when they take off. That can be used in a less noisy environment, but if you're in an area where everything's running on 2.4 gigahertz, it might not work that well. But what can be done is just treating them like a rogue access point. Additionally, do physical checks of places that you would hide something, like the roof or a wooded perimeter. So that's the presentation. QR code goes to my website where I have the slides available for download, a video version of this, and my LinkedIn and all of that. So just a bit about me. I worked for the government for 10 years or better. Back in 2020, I got moved to the cybersecurity team, which I supported for years before that. And before that, I was in the National Guard. I did artillery, hazmat response, and I worked at a bar as a bouncer. So that's it. Hey, I came in under 15 minutes.
Hey. So I'm actually kind of working on the same thing. I got a flight stork building about halfway back home.
Yeah.
And so what are you using as far as like your, because right now I have some SpeedEB F405 wings. What are you using for your control stack?
I have that one. I also have the Orange Cube. Okay. I think that's Pixie Hawk. I haven't actually gotten to play with that recently just because I don't have a workshop anymore, but that's a whole other story.
Oh, yeah.
But yeah, and a Radio Master controller and I think it's a Cadex Walk Snail FPV headset.
And what are you printing it in? I'm like right now I'm just trying with Storm or standard PLA plus. I'm like that's.
I'm using ASA Light or ASA Aero from Bamboo.
Nice.
It's a really finicky filament, but once you get it kind of dialed in, it's as strong as PETG, but it doesn't have any of the issues of PLA. The issues I have with PLA is heat tolerance. I've had it melt on me. Like luckily I didn't take anything off the ground yet because it was the rudders and ailerons, and I don't want those melted.
Yeah, I figure this thing's gonna get like 50 feet and then crash, but.
Oh yeah, no, this thing will crash. Like I've already planned for that.
Nice.
I've also been building like TPU shock, like printing off TPU shock dampeners for like, this year's a Raspberry Pi with just a ward driving loadout on it. And you can power it like off of a 5-volt power buck or its own battery source. And also, I've been wanting to attach this Hack 1 RF to something and see what I can do with that.
Do you think if there's a situation where there's a detected drone and ROE is met and you get permission to take it out, that maybe like a better solution to take down an adversarial drone would be just have your own like very cheap, low-cost drone to collide with the thing?
Possibly, but that gets into a lot of FAA regulation if you can't bring a drone down over like anything that's going to cause insurance damage.
Yeah.
They did that in New Jersey, remember? When they hit the car? Somebody did that during all those drone incidents.
Yeah, those are survey drones. Like, I don't know.
Oh, you do know about that?
Like, I don't know anything about that, but where I did like GIS stuff, like the big package on the bottom, that's like a LiDAR sensor suite. So they were survey drones of some type. Like, I've seen types of those in West Virginia doing like surveys for like where they're putting the oil pipelines.
That's the first time I heard of
Yeah, I remember seeing that. It's like, that's a LiDAR sensor package on the bottom, whatever it is. So those drones in New Jersey were big.
it. Yeah.
How hard is it if your drone goes down for them to track it back to you?
So that gets into the issue with forensics. Legally, you're supposed to be able to do that per FAA regulations. Otherwise, it is kind of difficult, and the specific forensics for that would require some specialization to figure out where it launched from. Because otherwise, it's just a crash drone.
This kind of touches on something he already said, but out of Ukraine, I think in the last 3 to 6 months, they have a new interceptor that I don't know if it's even explosive, it might just be kinetic.
It's kinetic.
But, just cheap, expendable to take down Shaheeds and other, seen quadcopters taking down quadcopters and all kind of stuff. So given the restrictions where you can't single jam, you cannot shoot a gun at it to knock it out of the sky, like he said. Like he said, using a interceptor drone to knock something else out of the sky, you mentioned that the concern there would be where it falls.
Yeah.
And if it damages anything there. And so overall, I guess I'm asking, given the FAA constraints and legalities, where do you see consumer, private individual, as drones become more prevalent, going to try to combat or address safety from drones? What can the average person do that's not the military? Where do you see it going?
I don't really know, and I don't think anyone really does. Like, the FAA is talking about doing a lot of stuff. There's been laws proposed, like it's mostly regulation and policy, of giving people access to own their own airspace, because we don't own our own airspace over our own property above 10 feet. Per DuPont versus the EPA. So if you give people permission to own their airspace up to 200 feet, maybe something can be done. Or if it's not over like a urban area where it might risk hurting someone or causing damage that is insurable, then possibly they could use an interceptor to shoot it down if you're in the middle of nowhere. One of my big concerns has been like the Farmer Brown types, because anytime I fly, it's usually in the middle of nowhere, so I usually tell the old guys on a tractor I'm flying, please don't shoot down my drone. So,
It just seems like you said, with the attacker threshold lowering, increasing, each year, it gets simpler for somebody to go do something nefarious. I wonder if laws are going to be enough to mitigate that for most people.
well, if a criminal is going to do something, they don't really care about that anyway, so I think that might just be like putting a Band-Aid over a bullet wound. If they let you own your own airspace, then you might be able to do something. Or if you just find it on your property, just turn it off and give it to the cops.
For like an average kind of civilian, is there a way to like identify, say you see something flying over, like what's the best approach to figure out what that is if you don't have all this knowledge?
Contact your local police or the airport, because legal drones have to have, like over a certain size, they have to have a broadcast device in them that shows like the takeoff location and the tracking number and who it belongs to. If, again, if it's like a criminal device, call the cops. Will they do something? I don't know.
What's the cost of building your own drone?
So the Titan Dynamic Avenger that I'm building in printing material has been about $60 after printing. The electronics on board, a couple $100. The camera and everything, not counting the 3D printer itself or the flight controller, the headsets, about $1,000. And that's a larger drone too.
And do you get significant capability above like a DJI or something like that?
Yes, it has a 2-meter wingspan and it can carry several kilos. The DJIs that can do that, like DJI is mostly quadcopters, and the drones that can do that are typically, I think the Inspire's 2,000 and the Matrix 600 regular is about 4 or 5, and the Matrix Pro is about 10 grand now, maybe 8.
Is that the one they use for agriculture?
Yeah, and filming for like movies and stuff. Like the great big has like 16 propellers on it.
Wondered if you had any specific tips. I've got been trying to build one of the Titan Dynamics models myself, and where I'm tripping up is just trying to get the foamed filament print right.
So the issue with a lot of the Titan models that I have found is they have a lot of errors in the 3D model. I'm kind of annoyed by that since they no longer sell to civilians and hobbyists because they have an ITARS compliant government military contract. Using the lightweight filament from Polylite and Bamboo are the two that I've found that work best, but you have to really sit and watch it because of the errors in the geometry that they made.
Okay. That's interesting. I know that. Okay.
Yeah, I'll get with you in a minute then.
What slicer are you using?
Slicer, I use Orca or just the Bamboo Studios. Like a lot of the ones, especially with the Titan Dynamic, like you need to go in to Orca, which has a lot more like settings and like fine-tune stuff to like a obsessive degree. Like, that's a really good slicer for that.
Yeah, I've been using Orca now from Prusa just because, like you said, it's a lot more options.
Yeah, when you were saying that there's kind of like a lack of advancement in forensics in this environment, you talking about like specific
Like
tools that-
dedicated drone, like there be like because a lot of the stuff on the drone, if it's going to be on an SD card, you can just do typical forensics on that. Like if you find something that has like a Raspberry Pi, you're just going to do Linux stuff. But like as far as like pulling the flight data from the chip, that gets a little bit more complicated just because you end up dealing with like these massive gibberish CSV files. So, but like there isn't like a dedicated like sleuth kit for drones yet. But it's people taking existing forensics tools and like making it work.
You mentioned the Ukrainian drones that are using fiber optics for communication. I was wondering if you've gotten any chance to look into doing that, or if you've found what kind of mission limitations there are for those.
So I haven't gotten into doing anything with that. Domestically, there wouldn't be a reason to use fiber optics because there isn't jamming here. But the mission limitations of fiber optics are now like you have a limited range, like you have a larger drone that can maybe go 40 kilometers. And increasingly back and forth between the Russians and Ukrainians, they've been trying to cut each other's fiber optic lines with the drone propellers of like smaller drones. Anyone else?
That was great.
Yeah, okay.
Thank you.
Thanks.